Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Jonathan Sim, and I'm a research officer at the College of Humanities, Arts and Social Sciences here at NTU. I specialize in Chinese philosophy, classical Chinese philosophy in particular, and I will be your chair for this session. It gives me a great pleasure and honor, indeed, to introduce you to the next speaker, Professor George Halpern. Professor George Halpern, is a friend and a true inspiration to me. I asked George what he'd like me to say, and he said, well, you don't have to say very much, just 3 sentences will do. So let me just say this. I think it's 5 sentences, so if you don't mind the 2 extra sentences. I've known George for almost 2 years already. We've been working together under Paralimus on a project on ways of navigating around the barriers between East and West. Okay? So what can I tell you about George? George is a very passionate and a very curious man. He started out his career as a cook. Actually, I wanted to say chef, but he says, no, chef, there's a difference between a chef and a cook. Well, he started out as a cook, but then he got curious about the world. And then he got curious about medicine, so he became a doctor. And then he got curious again, so he got a PhD in medicine and became a professor of medicine. And then that wasn't enough to satisfy his curiosity, so Professor George Halpern, at a very, very young age of 81, started researching in the field of neuroscience. And this clearly, cooking and medicine are his 2 greatest passions. So without further ado, let us welcome Professor George Halpern to whet our appetites with some food for thought.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you. That's a great introduction. I want to tell you something about my presentation. I asked the advice of Jan Wasbinder. And I discovered that Jan had a few peculiar qualities. The first one, he has a laser-style eyes. And the second one, he is a gifted surgeon for the treatment of obesity. My initial number of slides was more than twice what you will see. So he practiced bariatric surgery and liposuction, and so now I think it's more acceptable. The idea of this talk started about 10 years ago. 5 years before, Joshua Lederberger coined the word microbiome. And in fact, we changed it 2 years later to microbiota, and I will explain that during the course of this presentation. The second thing is that 2 years ago, the group I have been working since 1981 at the University of California at Davis finally came to the solution and to the demonstration that mother's milk is the only food that should be given to newborns and infants. And this will be essentially the first part of my talk. And then I will try to conclude on what we are in, which is an environment which is changing in a way which is not always the good way. And one example I will show is the consequences of the abuse, especially by the cattle industry and the agriculture industry on the use of antibiotics. So, I have a question for you. First in Chinese, and you have to pardon my accent. Zhao Shang, how? Did you have breakfast? Please, who had breakfast today? Oh, who didn't have breakfast? Well, this is exactly the proportion of people who consider food as essential, but not as necessary. The common wisdom is that we need breakfast. The experience, I'm talking about scientific evidence, prove that some people may need breakfast, but other people live very, very well without breakfast. However, people who don't have breakfast must eat because they need energy, and the major source of energy is food. The other issue these days, and it's true in Singapore, that people consider food as a Janusian commodity. That means it's good and pleasant, but it's also dangerous. And so they are being obsessed by diet. And people die because they think only about what they should eat without enjoying it. And what is interesting is that, in my opinion, he's a very good cardiac surgeon, but I think he's a kind of a charlatan. Dr. Oz, in this issue, makes a comment which is making most people who are in food really completely mad. But this is not nutrition. I mean, we don't eat nutrients. We eat food. We grow food. We raise animals. We kill them to eat them. Food is something in all religions which is sacred. All the rituals, social, even the funeral dinners celebrate food. Everything starts at birth. And in this circumstance, which is still the vast majority of birth, the infant eats and swallows the vaginal fluids of the mother. If you think about the anatomy of a woman, you understand that many of the germs which are in the intestinal tract are also found around the perineal surfaces, and therefore many of these germs, which are the mother's germs in the intestinal tract, will also in part colonize the vagina, and that means that the baby, when he or she is born, will have many of the germs of the mother. This doesn't happen with C-section. However, for the last few months, in many parts of the world, the surgeon collects the vaginal fluid of the mother before the surgery and feeds the baby at birth with these secretions. So here you have a newborn whose genes are half the ones of his mother. And the germs of the mother are perfectly adapted to the mother. So there is a symbiotic reaction already. The other thing that happens is that when the baby is born, the food he should get, or she should get, is the one which is on the nipple of the breast, which comes out. But again, on the nipple of the breast, you have germs. These are the germs of the mother. And they come into the digestive tract, and about 18 hours after birth, there is a colonization of the mother's beneficial germs. The other thing is that the breast contains a series of glands, and initially, with the stimulation of prolactin and to some extent oxytocin, but prolactin is produced in a rush at birth, the secretion starts pretty violently, first with something which is different called colostrum. And this contains all the protective substances that the baby will need for the first few hours to avoid viral infections, to avoid most of bacterial infections. And colostrum is critical. But again, colostrum belongs to a certain individual, to the mother. If you give colostrum collected from a pool of women, it doesn't work that well. There's a match there that we cannot ignore. And this is colostrum. And this is milk, mother's. So you see already, you can see the difference. And the amount of antibodies here is very high. Here it's pretty low. What is in human milk? Well, you've got lactose, you've got lipids, you've got proteins, then you've got HMOs. You know, in the United States, HMO is Health Maintenance Organization. This is exactly an HMO, except that it's human milk oligosaccharides. And you have a number of oligosaccharides with different molecular weights and different structures. These were suspected, but were only identified less than 5 years ago due to progress in chemistry, and especially by Carlito Labria, who is at UC Davis, and whose work I am presenting here in short. So here you have the proteins, and then in milk, what is important is that it's a fluid which contains a lot of glycosides. And I mean, the glycosides are energy, sugars. So you have lactose, glycolipids, oligosaccharides, HMOs, et cetera, et cetera. And then these microbiota need these oligosaccharides. I will show you that you don't find that in cows. You don't find that in goats. You find that only in humans, and there are differences between mother A and mother B. Baby A will benefit totally from mother A, baby B from mother B, but if you cross them over, it's not that great. So there are also antimicrobial, pathogen blocks, prebiotics, probiotics, which are contained in human milk. If you are giving milk, mother's milk, there's David Mills, who is a bacteriologist in the same department. you find that in the strong consumers of milk, you have these bacteria which thrive. And I will talk a little bit later about this one. Well, here it is, Bifidobacterium Infantis. It's bifidus, that means it looks like the tongue of a snake, and it's for infantis, for newborns. And it contains very specific, it thrives on very specific HMOs. If you don't have them, it dies. This is the only bacterium that helps baby thrive. It's going to be commercially available. A company called Elive is being formed at UC Davis, and it's going to make sure that it could be used as a supplement into some mother's milk. And if you don't have enough, if the baby is not consuming enough milk, then you have all these bacteria. I'm sure everybody is familiar with E. coli. You have some good E. coli with majority, but you can have some very bad ones, and the baby is dead. A Clostridium, the family of Clostridia, is very dangerous potentially. So if you look now at what happens in developing countries and in some rich countries like the motherland of Brian Arthur, which is Ireland, you find that there are very different bacterial fecal flora. In Bangladesh, Gambia, even Armenia, and then we go down to more civilized countries like Switzerland, Canada, Georgia, Sweden, Italy, Davis, and Ireland. You find that the population of these is much higher, except the bacterioides, than in more advanced countries. It's understandable. If you have been to Bangladesh, you can understand why babies must survive. There's nothing to help them. The public health system there is in the making. It has been in the making for a long time. It's still in the making. So they are fighting and supporting themselves with these good bacteria. So what is the intestinal microbiota? It's made of 300 to 1,000 species of bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and viruses. And by the way, the viruses are essentially bacteriophages. And that's what Hirsch mentioned. And they are very useful because these viruses kill the bad bacteria, not the good ones. And the total population of microbes in the intestine is 100 billion. That's 10 times more microbes than you and I have cells. 50% of these resident microbes have a compatibility with the genes of the mother. That means 50% of the genes of the baby. And here is the Bifidobacterium Infantis. So it has, we know a lot about it. That's why it can be grown now under difficult but controlled conditions. And it's going to change, we hope, the development of many, many babies all over the world. So, yeah, that's evolved biosystems. This microbiome is going to change, and the baby is going to be better. The immune system develops if it's kicked, if it's stimulated. And one way to stimulate it, the easiest way, is to have microbes around. But this is not only the immune system, it's also the brain and the central nervous system. So what are the differences between human milk, animal milks, infant formula? Well, the protein in human milk is okay. The fat is just right. It's the enzymes to digest the fat do exist. It's more than one lipase. There's enough water, and the anti-infective properties are present. If humans have a brain proportionally much larger than the other primates, it's because of the quality and the nature and the composition of human milk, which helps for a safe immune system. That means growth of the brain during childhood, infancy and childhood, and also because the children don't die. The neurons grow. We were born with few neurons. At 1 month, we have many more. 9 months, wonderful. Now, the baby is already very happy. 2 years, they walk, and adults, it's done. After that, some of them will die. But neurons are 20% of our cells in the brain. 80%, more than 80%, are other cells called the glial cells. And these cells, and there are many of them, are members of the immune system. They are the structure of the central nervous system, and they bring the food to the neurons. The neurons are very specialized. They don't go shopping. They don't cook. They just wait for the food to be brought to them. And the glial cells, all of them, they have different functions, are providing all that support, and they manage to keep the brain in its good shape. If you don't have glial cell, you get a sponge. The second revolution arrived. What we think is true is that it was close to the beginning of Neanderthal and Denisovans in Siberia. These humans, pre-sapiens humans, mastered fire. And they changed everything. Cooking changed everything. First, you can reduce the amount of food, concentrate by removing water, etc. So you get a smaller volume and a lot more energy. Second, you break down the walls of vegetables or the structure of greens, and they become tasty and digestible. Three, when you don't have a refrigerator, it's better to cook so that you can keep, etc., etc. So the thing is that this Neanderthal man gave later on rise to the diversity of the phenotypes of Homo sapiens sapiens. But from the beginning, as far as we can check, because we have evidence, humans didn't eat for the sake of eating, like a cow which is going to eat any grass available. Humans wanted to enjoy food. They wanted to see food. They wanted to smell food. They wanted to taste food. They wanted the structure in the mouth, which is like touch. They wanted to do a lot of things. They wanted to hear the crack or the noise that you have and the enjoyment when you crush between your teeth a nut or an almond. And that's why we have all these nerves plus other receptors in our digestive tract which follow food in all its format and tastes. The first one to appear in the womb around the first trimester of pregnancy is sweetness, and it's associated with instinctive pleasure. That's why when a baby is crying, you give that baby a few drops of sweet water, and that's it. But it's also salt, it's also a lot of other things. Pleasure associated with everything is under the central control of two areas. The most important one is the nucleus accumbens, and the VTA is here. The VTA is more kind of a dispatcher. We only eat what we like. I wrote an article, an editorial in Flavors, and that got me a lot of email, and that was the title of the article. So we only eat what we like for a lot of reasons. But we also eat only what is affordable, what is accessible, what fits in our culture, and what we have discovered and liked before the age of 6. It's only 10% of what we eat and like that we discover after the age of 6. And if you have elderly people like me who are going to die very soon, I mean, I hope not, and you ask them, what would you like to eat for your last meal? And most of them will tell you, wow, I remember this bouillabaisse of my grandfather or this chocolate mousse of my grandmother. That's what I would like to have. And about culture, there are consequences. That's, I can tell you, my students love that slide. And they understand it. I make a flop in California. You know, this is a translation of Jean Brillat-Savarin. He was kind of 50 at that time, but in 1820, 50 was an old age almost. They said that the pleasures of the table are for every man, of course every woman, of every land, and no matter what place in history or society, they can be a part of all of the pleasures, and they last the longest to console us when we have outlived the rest. And you can imagine what he was talking about. I want to show you two important experiments which were done a few years ago, this one a number of years ago. In Paris, at a hospital called Bichat, there was on the 4th floor a major department of nutrition run by Mariana Halpern. We were born the same year in the same area in Warsaw, Poland, which became the ghetto later on. And I left early in life. He was one of the 17 people who escaped the destruction of the ghetto of Warsaw in 1943, 44. 17 people who escaped and are still alive through the sewers. So there was a major freeway around Paris at that time, which had been achieved, called the Peripheric Freeway. And in 1970, there were no helmet laws. And on Saturday night, a lot of 18, 19, 20-year-olds were racing on the motorcycle around Paris. And the hospital was next to that freeway. So the surgeons of the trauma center got dozens, every weekend, dozens of young people, absolutely healthy, with broken bones. And spending time in a trauma center is very expensive. People had insurance, but somebody has to pay for the insurance. The national insurance system in France is always broke. And so they were looking for a way to get these people out of the hospital as soon as possible. So what he did show is that if you change the presentation and the taste, not the nature of the food which is given to these young people, they could get better. So what they did, they divided this huge room with 25 beds on each side into left and right. And on the left-hand side, they got this kind of food. And then the same components were taken to a kitchen on the 4th floor, prepared by a chef, a dietitian. It didn't look like sushi, but it was close. And the result that the same people would stay 3 days less with the good food. Just tells you that we don't eat what we don't like. And when we eat what we like, we benefit. And let me show you the second experiment, which was done by the same group, except that Marion had left much later in 1994. There, they had people in the hospital, in bed. I don't know if you have been hospitalized, but there are two sides in my life which had a lot of similarities: hospital and prison. You're isolated, you're alone. The television, if you have one, is crap. The food, there's no sex, of course. times. And the only thing you are dreaming of is the food, and the food is horrible. So they changed that at the hospital at Bichat. And I did that with the hospital authority in Hong Kong. I told them, I'm going to be in the hospital one day or another. It happened 2 years later. I don't want to eat what you serve. I said, okay, so we had a discussion with the chef, and the food is now very good. It doesn't mean that you have to go to Hong Kong to be hospitalized. So imagine, was my experience, imagine that I am in a hospital bed, and television is same quality or absence of quality. It's very difficult to do anything. So you're bored to death. And then a charming nurse comes around 11 o'clock and say, George, this is the menu of the day, but you have some choices. So she reads the menu and she says, appetizer, this. And main course, we have a choice between pasta and pork belly Sichuan style. I said, pork belly with Sichuan? Wow! So here comes the cart with the tray, and my pork belly is there. So imagine. So this is, I'm in my bed. She just left. And then half an hour later, I hear the cart. And then they open the door. I smell. Then Then I look at it. Oh, it's there. Then I taste it. Orgasm. I'm in heaven. Then I eat it. And then a nap. Wow. Until dinner. The nurse comes at 4:30 and says, George, we've got a problem. I said, may I help? She said, no. We got a shortcut in the kitchen. So the fridges are safe, but we cannot cook. Fortunately, we kept some of your pork belly in the fridge. So if you don't mind, we're going to serve that to you. Now, pork belly is pork fat. I don't know if you have tried to slice pork fat, which used to be liquid. When it's solidified, it's candle wax. It looks, at worst, it tastes like that. So you have your tray coming, and then you look at that, wow, your mood drops by 2 meters. And of course, you cannot digest that, so you don't sleep. So what happens in your blood? When you digest food, your pancreas secretes, especially for fat, pancreatic juices, and one marker in your blood is the pancreatic polypeptide. So if you have the good food, woo, digested, the fat is cut into pieces, it gets into your body, you feel well because we feel well after fat, and that's it. Now, if you have the cold meal, the same thing, this is below that it's nonsense. So you see that it doesn't go up. It's non-significant. So you feel that you have eaten a pig with plenty of fat, and you cannot digest it. So you don't benefit from that. So the second part, or the third part, is going back to the microbes. And I'm going to speed up because Jonathan is nice enough to have these numbers saying I'm running short of time. But you see, this is what we are. We are between health and disease. But there is no black or white in humans. We are all gray in between. And we do have things in our body which are healthy, and many of them we don't know, but they are not. And the idea is that we are symbiotic. That means we depend on each other. We depend on the trillions of microorganisms and much less on our cells. And the environment is influencing both. But essentially, the important part is that the toxins and beneficial metabolites are made both by the microorganisms, generally the beneficial metabolites, and we react by absorbing food, energy, and defending ourselves against all the damages of our body and the environment. So it starts in the oral cavity, and we have a lot of microbes which are useful in our mouth. Some of them we don't like because they produce smelly components. That's why we use a lot of mouthwash. But it's not always very good to use too much mouthwash, because they make a lot of good stuff. In the gut, it's more complicated. We have ruminococcus, which is found in ruminants. That means that's how cows with only cellulose can survive and thrive. Well, we are a little bit of ruminants, except we don't have 4 stomachs. And then there's another one which has had a very bad reputation. It's called Helicobacter pylori, which is in the stomach. Now, it creates in some people ulcers, young males. So the vast majority of you is female, so don't have to worry. But it protects against allergies. So you have a germ that was considered to be the Nazi of our microbiome, and they all wanted to kill it with massive and long treatments of antibiotics. Now we are coming back saying, well, maybe a short treatment, and if it doesn't work, well, we'll give you something else for your ulcer. The microbiome depends on gene expression, but also influences the expression of our genes in our guts and elsewhere. And what is more important is that the brain and the gut are in permanent conversation. So you have, within a few hours of life, we are colonized, and if you look at a healthy gut function, you get a healthy central nervous system function. If you have butterflies or more in your guts, then you get problems in your brain. And it's true the other way around. That means if you, and there are plenty of students here, if you have an exam with a very nasty jury, you're going to have problems in your guts, and these problems are going to influence the function of your brain. So beware when you get your PhD dissertation. So how does it work? Well, as I told you, the gut microbes alter the gene expression of our cells. it works in a very complex way. I'm sure that Karen or Jan, if you instruct, will have this PowerPoint available for you if you're interested, and you can look at all the details. But it was in Nature Reviews, Microbiology. You can find it free of charge on the internet. But our senses do influence and talk to our gut and to the microbiome. If we have problems in the microbiome, in microbiota, due to use of antibiotics, due to be seated for 18 hours a day in front of a computer, due to overeating the national American dish, pizza, believe it or not, due to killing all the germs we can have on our body and on our mucosa, then we are going to alter the intestinal microbiome. Doesn't mean that you have to have dirty hands. No. But this will eventually result in autoimmune disorders or in immune deficiency, and more importantly, in metabolic dysfunction. This gentleman is obviously pregnant, 9 months, and or chronic inflammation. So now you know, and you better take care of your friendly microbes. Another area which is recent is that it seems, and there's some good evidence, that autism, it's called now it's called autistic syndrome, disease syndrome, is in part due to alteration of the gut microbiota. If we analyze the feces of autistic children, it's very different from their siblings or from other children of the same age, in the same school, in the same environment. So there is now there are now a number of procedures which are considered for the treatment of autism, one of them being fecal transplant. It's a beautiful name, which means that you take the shit from somebody who is healthy, you insert a big tube in the ass of the autistic child, and you inject that in appropriate medium, and you hope for the best. But this seems to work in at least 20% of severe autistic children. The publications are in press. So, to make a long story short, you have these two pathways. One is from the brain to the gut microbiota, the other one from the gut microbiota to the brain. And both of them are indispensable for our survival. This figure will be in a chapter which should be available. The book should be available today. Today is the 8th, yeah, today. The chapter is authored by Abigail O'Connor, that was a PhD dissertation, myself, and Rosemary Walsham from who is Professor of Nutrition. Essentially, we have been looking for reasons which are very personal at wine. Rose and I were at UC Davis at the same time, and we worked and we published a lot on wine after, of course, drinking the whole bottle. And we found that wine was not alcohol, may contain alcohol. Alcohol is a byproduct, we're not interested. But wine, especially red wine, and good red wine from California, for instance, contains polyphenols, And many of these polyphenols are absorbed. And what do they do if you have the right microbiota? What do they do? Well, essentially, if you eat a lot of meat, Texas beef, fat, meat, plenty of protein and some fat, you're going to have in your gut flora a substance which comes from carnitine and proline, which is called trimethylamine. This is the amine, these are the trimethyl. Then in the TMA goes through lactation through the liver, and then there's an enzyme, which is flavonomonoxidase 3, and this transforms the TMA in TMA oxide. Now imagine that you have hydrogen peroxide, not for me, but to get your hair blonde, and you have the hydrogen peroxide on your mucosa or inside your eyelids. It's going to burn. So if you have TMA oxide that comes inside an artery, it's going to burn it. It's going to create inflammation. And this inflammation will attract macrophages, different cells, and create a plaque, etc. And this is the initial mechanism of atherosclerosis. That's why people are saying now shouldn't eat too much meat if you want to prevent atherosclerosis. This is, we need protein, and we need animal protein, so don't stop eating meat. Cold turkey, but be aware that excess of meat, even with the normal flora, is going to be deleterious. Now, the good news is that this mechanism can be essentially controlled by the polyphenols of red wine. Unfortunately, de-alcoholized red wine is very bad. Tastes awful. But we are working very actively to get a decent wine, red, without alcohol. On the day that happens, you don't have to worry about your arteries. You just drink more of it. Now, here is some final remarks. We produce per capita enough food. Well, that started in 1960. But first, believe it or not, in most poor countries, people are getting richer. I mean, their level of comfort, etc., and the life expectancy is much better. So, for good reason, they want more food. They don't want to starve anymore. They don't want famine to be inevitable. So the food production is increasing, which means a pressure on the environment which is not going to be sustainable. So we have to find other ways, and I think in some of the next conferences that Paralimes is going to organize, this will be addressed, and we must find solution. Water is also very important. I want just to almost conclude by showing you that the benefits of some magic drugs. And you know, in 1945, the US troops were stationed in France. In 1945, I was 10 years old. And I got a very severe sore throat infection with Streptococcus B, which is very bad for the heart and the kidneys, and you can die. And of course, all these germs were resistant to sulfonamide that were invented in 1935, the year of my birth, by Domach at Bayer in Germany. He was protected by the Nazis. He got a Nobel Prize anyway. But they were resistant. So my father went to the US Embassy and pleaded, and he was given 3 vials of squib penicillin, which was yellow. Why? Because this penicillin was recovered from the urine of the American soldiers who had been infected and re-extracted and manufactured for civilians. There was not enough penicillin available. And I still remember the pain in my ass. Literally, injecting that penicillin was like having fire injected in my muscle. But it worked. So it was magic. Rheumatic fever was almost wiped out in most countries thanks to penicillin. Syphilis was wiped out in most countries, making comeback, but for other reasons. You just can't imagine what antibiotics did for about 10 years. And at that time, it was for humans and humans only. And it was prescribed for good reasons. But then, about 10 years later, I don't know who discovered that, somebody discovered that if you give in the food some antibiotics to cattle, to sheep, to pigs, they grow. They become bigger. And they are leaner much of the time. So you can imagine the industry, because the industry was artisanal before suddenly, about the 60s and especially the 70s with Richard Nixon, it became a huge industry. And industry is based on profit. And they saw, like going to Las Vegas, they saw dollars, and that was it. 85% of the production of antibiotics now go into agriculture and animal husbandry. So, and now aquaculture. I tried to find that, but in Hong Kong and China, aquaculture is the industry of the future. So you find that now this therapeutic, the cows are very healthy, so no. And to prevent disease in leeks or tomatoes, forget it. All this is for plant production and for growth promotion. And what happens is that a lot of germs which are around, and which are very bad, are resistant to these antibiotics. When you eat a steak from an industrial firm, and if you have an ultraviolet lamp, you switch off the light in your kitchen, you bring the UV lamp, and you switch it on, and you look at the color of your steak. It's either bright blue because of ampicillin, it's either yellow, bright yellow because of fluoroquinolone, it's either green because of the tetracyclines, or it's red because of erythromycin, period. All the food which is industrial in the United States, is like that. And when Barack Obama said, we have put the consumption of antibiotics under control, I was hoping that it was there. No, in hospitals. True, 2 years ago. So we are facing literally an uphill battle, and I think that it's even worse because you find now in lakes and rivers and everything, and besides, people take antibiotics for a viral infection, a cold, and they go to the toilet and it goes everywhere. So this is one major issue about food, which has been diverted and perverted under the influence of profit. Now, the good news is that we are in Singapore. This was a banquet a few years ago in Singapore for women. That means that food is sacred, food is enjoyed, food is varied, food is healthy. Look, they all look like my daughters. And really, my wife's Japanese, so I look a little bit like that. This is the perfect example of the symbiotic reaction between humans and food. And I cannot resist. But you are attending a symposium. Symposium is a Latin word, but it comes from the Greek, always. Greek, it's symposium with an O and not a U, and it means a drinking party. And the reason is that the Greeks didn't drink during meals, but they didn't leave the table or the area after the meal. Then they drank and had some food and, of course, had other activities. I don't think that we will enjoy that kind of party tonight or tomorrow night, but have a think about the next symposium. Thank you. Okay, Jonathan.
Okay, the gentleman over there.
There obviously is a soil microbiota. Can you hear me? There's a soil microbiota as well. Do we have any idea what agricultural antibiotics have done to the soil? Does anybody look?
That's a very important question. The University of California at Davis, which I collaborate to, have been, as I told you, for 35 years, has a huge program on that. And they are really frightened. I know that the University of Colorado has a program. And again, this is, in Colorado, it's even different and possibly worse. It's because much of the water we get on both sides of the Rockies come from the Rocky Mountains, a lot of it. And the soil is excreting many components, including the antibiotics. They cannot be metabolized by the natural environment, like microbes. So these are going first into the water table. Second, you find them after on vegetables, on fruits, and because they are still present, even in traces. But when you have a food that you consume, the food is the last before you piece in the chain of food production. That means each time, like for the fish, you start with the plankton and you end up with tuna, and you accumulate the antibiotics that you find from plankton to small fish to bigger fish to very big fish to tuna, and at the end there's concentrate. Many animals do not suffer from that. Humans are different because most animals who have a microbiome also, the microbiome is very different from ours. It's not as fragile. It's not as sensitive to changes. As I showed you, your brain is functioning because of the health of your microbiome. The day your microbiome is sick, you're depressed, you're anxious, you're ADHD, you're whatever. So, and you cannot work. So I think that the soil, that was my last slide for the real presentation. The last two ones were just to feel good. I think that's a huge danger, and I discussed that with Jan and said you must emphasize that, because one of the goals of this silent transformation is that we should go to the right direction in transformation, not down to sickness and epidemics. So yes, it's very important. Yes? What did you watch on the BBC?
Thank you for the very enlightening lecture. Well, unfortunately, my source of information usually comes from the news media, which has been dismissed as bullshit. So on the topic of shit, I think it's very enlightening. So put it in a proper language, the FMT, which affects obesity and metabolism, which recently been verified by the Massachusetts General Hospital, say that, you know, if you are somebody who has this skinny body and your output be transplant to those who have a heavy weight, the heavy weight will reduce the weight. And now it's made into capsules. So if you take 2 a day, might be more effective than you run 10 kilometers. So I like to hear your views. So there are a lot of names that supporting what I just said. So I'm not a doctor, okay? So these are all quotes about the FMT for obesity. I'd like to hear your view. Thank you.
You know, there's no obesity. There are only obese people. And I know that most obese people are happy obese people. And I don't see why they should be treated like lepers. Leprosy is contagious, obesity is not. And it's not because the image of the human body has been remanufactured by the magazine that want young women to be sleepable under the door so that they are thin enough, that the models of Auguste Renoir should be considered as sick. Having said that, diabetes, which is increasing everywhere in the world, is type 2, is closely associated with obesity. But it's a vicious circle because obese women give birth to children who will become obese because we now know that there is a transmissible predisposition, which is the metagenomics issue. So, but again, I think compared to the central part of the United States, Singapore is the paradise for ballerina dancers, which are necessarily not obese. I don't think that's a threat that should be considered as an epidemic, vital danger, as the WHO tries to make us believe. We can change the education programs about food, we can intervene nicely but firmly to stop the abusive, omnipresent promotion of junk food, that means sugar, fat, and salt. We can also penalize the companies, and I have on another slide, which I didn't show, the 12 companies that run food in the world, and they are everywhere. We can ask them to pay taxes or fines by promoting unhealthy things. It won't solve all the problems because we have an appetite for sugar, for sweetness, and for fat. And if you put on your tongue a drop of Diet Coke or a sweetener, you will make more insulin than if you put sugar, which means all the sweeteners are worse in terms of, that's for women, that's for men, obesity. So there are things we can do, but there's no political will. Most governments in most countries are servile servants of the industry for reasons which remain to be clear, not always. And I don't see how we, I'm not going to destroy the system. I just want people to be healthy and happy. And many of these people are unhappy, you're right. Many of these people are going to have consequences in health with diabetes, hypertension, etc. So but it's not with drugs or with insulin or with whatever that we're going to solve that problem. It's because of the lifestyle which is manufactured for profit by big companies. This is it. I don't care about changing the microbiome. If you change the diet, I can show that, but very briefly, you change the microbiome back to normal. So, and Tom mentioned yesterday aging. Well, if you are a little bit overweight, you live longer. I told that to Jonathan, he's concerned about his belly. But if you're obese, no.
Okay, next question,
Okay.
the lady over there.
Yeah, over here, right here. Thank you for your presentation. So, wanted to ask you about your opinion about China and its future. So you're based in Hong Kong. You obviously understand all the different cuisines. You understand all that's going on in China. So we're talking in this conference about a kind of a long time for something to be happening, and it's silent and it's transforming. So I'd just like to hear what you think of not so much the future of China, but all that's going on. What are you hopeful that China will be all right in the future, or do you think that the way that things are going on in the environment, in the food, in the lifestyle, and in the development of China, that there are some kind of things that we should be aware of?
Are you going to be here mid-October? Yes? We're going to have a conference, and I was assigned to talk in part about that. So I'll give a lecture about that. No, but I don't want to escape that question. I am not only happy, but I'm healthy when I live in China with Chinese people and Chinese food. And because I'm a cook, I don't have any problem at all. But I don't like going to American restaurants anymore. I don't feel good after what I eat. I don't like wild food. Even if I like it, I cannot eat it too often. So what I think is that it's not only my brain, I think it's my microbiome is now very well adjusted. It was always adjusted to the developing world because I spent much of my time in very poor countries eating with the people whatever was available, and that way I built intestinal flora, which is probably 10 times richer than it should be. but yes, my concern is that the children of my colleagues are much younger than I, and their children are begging to go to McDonald's. And I tell them, you're a parent, you want your child or your children to be happy and healthy and successful. Well, you may go once a month, but don't take them twice a week, because this is not what their body is used to. And if it were used to, I show you a picture of an American child eating at McDonald's and who is 12 and who weighs 80 kilos or 85 kilos and who is full of folds of fat. So China now is finally discovering that the westernization of food is creating more diabetes. It's true. It's true. My colleagues in China tell me, George, what can we do? I say, slap them on the ass and tell them not to eat Western food, only Chinese, and they will be better. I think this is an issue. The thing you have to know is that Coca-Cola buys every government on earth to introduce their products. When they are not introduced, remember, until 1935, Coca-Cola was by prescription only. In 1935, it was acquired by the Coca-Cola company in Atlanta, and it became a substitute for water. But again, Flint in Michigan in the United States is an example of what happens when a government and a governor do not care about public health, and people resort to bottled water, which is tap water bottle, because it's safe. Or, and that's what happened with the poor people in Flint when they had to buy bottled water. It was more expensive than a soft drink. So they bought soft drinks. You should look after 1 year of this lead poisoning or menace at the weight of these poor children, Mexican most of them, and they gained 2-3 kilos, which they shouldn't have gained if water was available. So you have, in terms of obesity or the variation, the decrease in the quality of food by globalization, a problem that China does not understand. And I tried with the Chinese Academy of Science with whom I work, with the members of whom I work, and to try to bring that to the attention of the public health people there. I don't know what will result, but there's something that has to be done. I hope that Singapore will reflect on that and take appropriate measures. It doesn't matter if a company is not happy, they are going to find to make money and kill people everywhere. It was the same thing with the tobacco companies. Now, I was in the Philippines and they were giving cigarettes to children coming out of school or at the door of a maternity to pregnant women who consulted. When I said this is criminal, the commercial attaché in Manila called me. I said, You will not say that in the Philippines. We're at home here. I say, sir, you do your job, I do mine.
Next question.
Can I ask? I have a short question. Sometimes short questions may have long answers. The body is not just tummy. And thanks very much for reminding us that we are an Amazon jungle. We are not just one organism. We are a whole ecosystem. Since you have this close association with China, you probably have come across the phenomena of qi gong, or food, and the other component would be air and the lungs.
Sure.
So they all lead to this. The body's immune system. The body is made so that it can self-correct, can recover from invasions, so forth. And so, but how is it that sometimes this immune system doesn't work? It is believed by Taoists that there's a certain practice involving breathing, involving the mind, like moving from chakra to chakra, directing your qi in a certain fashion, that somehow or other there are many, many people who blundered into this, who discovered actual benefits that they could measure even. Have you ever looked into this area?
I didn't, but my friend Mason Long, who just retired and went to the UK, published quite a lot. He was trained as traditional Chinese medicine practitioner. He is probably the best acupuncturist I've ever met. And he was associate professor in the Department of Rehabilitation Sciences at the Polytechnic University in Hong Kong. And he has been looking at a number of things. One marker, which is easy, or quite easy now to evaluate, is called the natural killer cells. These are cells from our immune system which attack foreigners, including cancer cells, which are different. And he has shown with, on a number of studies, and many of them are published only in Chinese, unfortunately, that most of the practices of traditional Chinese medicine, which is not only herbal, which is a conglomerate of techniques, including spiritual, etc., all can contribute to the optimal or increase, eventually, if needed, of natural killer cells. So yes, we know that. It's demonstrated, it was demonstrated in populations very diverse. He published that over 10 years, 12 years. He moved out in 2015, last year. So Mason Long, L-E-U-N-G, you can check on Google or PubMed, you will see a lot of his work, including the one on natural killer cells.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
Thank you. Thank you for your talk. Very interesting. I wonder if you'd address, you emphasized infancy and the populating the microbiome at infancy, at birth, at neonates. What is the long-term effect? I come from a generation where in the United States, breastfeeding didn't happen. Everybody got formula. So has there been any sign of a long-term impact of that practice during that time period? I mean, we're now in our 50s and 60s, the people who went through that generation. And what do you see?
You know, we can judge that at the age of 18 months. But after that, there are confounding factors, that's the technical word, which interfere with, that means we cannot assign a role or guilt or benefits to most things after the age of 18 months. We suspect that yes, there are things that eventually were corrected later on because the food was more diverse and the microbiome became more third world instead of first world. But it's very difficult to tell. Sorry, but we have to have homogeneous populations. We can't, and we shouldn't. We should consider what are the risks and what are the benefits. The risks are zero. The benefits are certain. Are they certain for everybody? To a certain degree, yes. But is it going to be this or is it going to be that? It depends on other factors which are genetic, environmental, etc. So it's complicated.
Okay, so we have reached the end of our session. So let's give a round of applause to Professor George Halpern.
Oh, thank you, Jonathan. He's a wonderful chairman. You should have him more often.